Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Andrew Jones. I am the Executive Director of Climate Interactive, and I'm here with a team of people from CI, and we're thrilled that you're here to talk about critical conversations, climate and equity, showing you some of the things that we do when we get with executive teams in different sectors. It's right at the top of the hour. Thank you for being on time. Please go to a Poll Everywhere site in another browser window, or use the QR code that you see here. Or Ava, could you post the link to what you should open in your browser window? And if you would, let's start this off by hearing from you all about settings, organizations, groups of people where you would love to lead a strategic conversation about climate and equity, or you would love to host one because you have access to that, or maybe someday you'd like to have access to hosting a strategic conversation about climate and equity. So business schools, the European Commission, internal organizational leadership meeting. Fantastic. This is the idea. Put it in there. Business schools, several of us, Megan and Ava and I were at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill at the Keenan Flagler Business School. We had 2 full days just on these topics at the business school, and we do a lot up at Sloan, the MIT Business School. Parliamentarians, the legislative branches of companies, of countries around the world. Elementary school, high schools, fantastic. If you're just joining, please go to this poll and let us know where you would love to lead or host strategic conversations about climate. If you're just joining, I'm Andrew Jones, Executive Director of Climate Interactive. This is going to be a webinar on how we may go to natural resources management organizations or municipal councils or high schools. What are the critical strategic conversations to have about climate and equity? And how would you use the En-ROAD simulator to lead them? Ava, can you just go ahead and post the simulator? Because that's what we're going to be playing with. Post a link for people who are joining. Some of you probably have never even seen it. You can go into the chat and check it out. Businesses, schools and colleges, industry organizations, local government leaders, universities, local government, large international companies with large climate impact, secondary schools, K-12 education, government agencies. Excellent. These would be great places. In a retirement village, I've done our workshop in several retirement villages. Love it. Love it. Members of parliament, environmental groups, legislatures. We'll talk a little bit about our experience there. All right. If you're just joining, I'm here with a big group. I'm going to stop sharing. And if everybody on our team who is ready for it, if you're not ready for it, don't. But turn your camera on. We'd just like to greet all of you who are here for the session. Megan Ritter and Josh Lohman and Catherine Markova and Khalid Ghaffar and Janet Tchaikovsky, Ava De Leon. We're all here, thrilled to be engaging you. Many of these folks are going to be answering your questions. So along the way, go to Q&A. See the Q&A button in Zoom. Ask your questions there. Okay, you guys can drop off. Go to the Q&A button. If you have a quick question, you're going to go to Q&A. And they're going to answer it there. Technical questions, engagement questions. Would you come and run a workshop questions? Could I give you $10 million questions? We're there to answer your questions. Longer questions, go to the support page. And the support page, I'll show you the link. It's, Ava, can you post the link to it? It's support at, and I'll show you there. Longer questions, you're going to go up here into the model. Here's the link to the model that was just sent to you. You can go to there to support. FAQs are there. You can have your own customized question there. What we're going to be doing today is talking about the conversations, strategic conversations in businesses, in government, in education, civil society, foundations, etc., using En-ROADS. And the beauty of En-ROADS, if you haven't seen it before, is that it is this free online simulator where when you make a change, like to energy efficiency, you can very quickly see what the result is and dig in deeper, see what the impacts of many policies are in the long-term future for the climate, and see it in 21 languages, and see it in whatever form you like. Well, here's the specific link, in fact, what I'm of the scenario that I just made. So I'm going to go put it into chat. There should be a lively chat here. So if you want to go on and see who else is in the session, that's where you should go. All right, I'm going to switch over to really set up what we're up to here today. We're Climate Interactive. We are a climate tech nonprofit based here in the US. Let me pull up this share. I hope you can see my screen. I think you can. A lot of people here in the chat. Hold on a second. We are Climate Interactive, climate tech nonprofit based in the US. 13 of us. We work closely with our collaborators at MIT, including the MIT Climate Pathways Project. We have been running over this last, frankly, 14 years, many strategy sessions that look a lot like this. This is the setting that we love. People talking to each other. These happen to be members of US Congress around the table, thinking about overall climate strategy, grounding their conversation in the best available science using En-ROADS and other tools. That's what you see there at the end, where we are facilitating the conversation. By the way, you want to make this happen? Send us a note at solutions@climateinteractive.org. We have a workshop version, there's a game version, there's a customized experiences. We probably guess a lot of people right now on this call are already what we call our ambassadors, people who have been trained in running these workshops. There are 780 of you in 80 countries and 21 languages. Actually, write in chat right now if you happen to be one of those folks who actually lead these conversations. So, what are the critical conversations to have? Here's a brief summary. When we look at all the ones that we've had in the past, they are about 5 things that ought to be talked about. Never quite in an order, but conversations at that executive level tend to go here. First, what are the physical risks? Climate change is here. Sea level rise, precipitation, water availability, extreme weather, heat, air quality, malarial expansion of the diseases around the world. These are the physical risks that are a concern today. They lead us to resilience, adaptation, all of these important topics. Secondly, what can we do to prevent this problem? Most of En-ROADS, our simulator, is dedicated to this: carbon pricing, energy efficiency, diet, and deforestation, and carbon removal, and coal, oil, gas, renewables, hydrogen, energy efficiency, electrification. How can you, as an organization, how can we all together prevent as much as possible of this significant challenge? And when we do it, how can we avoid creating new problems, particularly for disadvantaged people? And how can we take advantage of some co-benefits? Can we, as Beth Sawin says, multi-solve, find ways to address other goals that we have around equity at the same time? Fourth, this is more nuanced, transition risk. Transition risk. This is if you're a business, if you're a government, and the whole world takes action on climate, are you ready? for the regulations coming your way, for the changes in consumer preferences coming your way. If you're a bank and you've loaned a lot of money to coal, oil, and gas industries that then shrink a lot because of climate action, what does that mean for your financial performance? And what are the opportunities if you are a business that can take advantage of all the major changes in society? These four are deeply interrelated. These are the topics that get talked about. There's another underlying theme. I've had some of these conversations in Total, the oil and gas business in France, in Paris. I was in Stockholm for some strategic conversations with businesses there and oil and gas, but also Equinor in Norway. There's an underlying theme in those industries, in government, in business and education, the capacity for hope. Who are we as individuals working on these topics? How do we retain that ability to see a future that we want, to be honest about the world that is today, and hold that tension between the two? I call that hope, not optimism, not saying we've got it figured out. Hope, the ability to apply yourself day to day to continue to make things better as much as we can. 5 important conversations. Now, you can't just make a lecture. I can't lecture on these things. I can't have a PowerPoint to teach people this. No. Why? John Sterman, our colleague over at MIT, said it best. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. Research shows that showing people research on emissions reduction, on equity, on transition risk, on physical impacts, on hope, doesn't work. It doesn't sink in. People need to learn these ideas for themselves. So we give this model, we give this a workshop and experience that I'm going to demonstrate to you in a minute. And we love the words of Bucky Fuller, visionary here in the US, architect. If you want to teach people a new way of thinking, like how to address climate change, don't teach them. Give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. So a lot of what you're about to see is exercises drawn from the times that we've had with many of the main users of En-ROADS in different sectors. So I'll just name some of them. Roberta Barbieri from Pepsi, she said it, En-ROADS lit her brain on fire. So a business application. Financial services, Andrew Greenspan in the risk department. You'll see a lot about risk here. In the government area, Jayant Sinha, the member of parliament, talking about how he used the simulator. Here in foundations, Tom Steinbach, formerly of Hewlett, here now with Tempest Advisors. Kathleen Simpson of Russell Family Foundation. Ratna with Lubis was on the call this morning at 7 a.m., the first time we ran this workshop. Zulfa Rashid in the UAE. So these are some of the sectors. Now back to government, a senator, former senator, Mary Landrieu, and 2 Republican leaders in the US, Bob Inglis from Republic N, and John Curtis, head of the Conservative Climate Caucus. Overall, this comes from the experience we've had with 4,372 leaders. Of course, there are many of you out there using the simulator in many other sectors. So I want to lead us off with another poll question. Where we usually start is in this area of impact. So actually, this isn't the question I want at the moment. I'm going to go to, hold on one second. I'm going to find the right poll for you all. Which of these impacts, this is where we start. Okay. Please go take this poll. In those settings, when we engage top leaders, the first place to go is what people care about. You don't jump straight to fixing the problem or other considerations. Why are we here? We're not here because of temperature. We're here because there are impacts we see today that we care about in the future. Impacts, physical risks is the framing that comes out of a lot of the risk world. What are the physical risks, the impacts that leads you to say, this is a serious issue, it's worthy of us spending time on it? Air quality. 1 in 10 deaths around the world are due to air quality. Burning fossil fuels, particularly coal, you're voting for that. Habitat loss, air quality, habitat loss, and biodiversity. So I'm going to get these air and habitat. Number 3, maybe crop yield. Crop yield. This is where we start. This is where we start. I'm going to show you how you can use this interactive simulator, En-ROADS, to engage people in thinking about that. So the first thing we like to do is to acknowledge that what they're saying, what they're concerned about is legitimate and real. What did you lead with? You said habitat and air. So clicking here on any variable, greenhouse gas emissions, impacts, you can scroll through and see all the different impacts that are of interest. Habitat. Here's what is the most interesting graph about biodiversity and habitat. Clicking on the 3 dots to make it nice and big. Yes, you should be concerned because in a business as usual future, this measures what percentage of species are losing more than half of their climatic range. As some areas get warmer, those animals, invertebrates, insects, etc., would need to shift to be in other places. Mammals, 24% would lose more than half of their range, a major threat to biodiversity. And this little line here, you can see that silver line is 2%, which is the rate, how much we've lost today. 2% today, headed to 24%. Of course, this sets up the challenge. Can we do better than this? Can we make that blue line change? And that's what we'll do later. If we have action in different ways, that will change those results. The second that you named was air quality, air pollution from energy. PM 2.5 are tiny particles implicated in cardiovascular disease, in asthma, in other kinds of heart disease. 1 in 10 deaths coming from this, and it's getting worse. This is the rise of coal. This would be in a world with more coal. Can we do better? The third that you mentioned, crop yield. Crop yield is down here. Decrease in crop yield from temperature. The major crops that feed people around the world. Rice is here at, how much have we, it's a 2% drop in crop yield. It would go as high as 8. In a world where at 8 billion people, headed up above 10 or so, this is a significant challenge. We need to do much better. So of these topics, the first place that we always go is, like I showed you here, start with physical risks. Start with what we care about and acknowledge what's going on with impacts. Secondly, what can we do to prevent as much of this problem as possible? So what we're going to do is think, let's do better than that. And how we do it is by starting with lower priority actions. Don't go straight to the fix, because we can really show the distinction between some things that are discussed but really don't help as much. Let's go look at some of those, and we'll do it here briefly in a poll. Here comes another poll. I'm curious, when you think about lower priority actions, what are some that you hear talked about? Which of these following do you think are not as high priority as they seem to be discussed to be? And here you go. Trillion trees and fusion, direct air capture, bioenergy, carbon removal, hydrogen, coal CCS. You're voting and voting. This is great. Keep voting. We want to see more of your answers. By the way, if you have questions along the way, put it in Q&A. We've got a big team of people who are ready to answer your questions. Or just write into chat with comments to each other, but go to Q&A. What's getting the votes? A trillion trees. Fusion. Gas CCS. A trillion trees. Okay. We like to start by being honest about a lot of the excitement about solutions that may not be as high priority. I'm going to open up En-ROADS again, and here's the world that we're going to test these things in. I'll start with a trillion trees, and we're going to test a trillion trees in the context of this baseline. The baseline is a somewhat conservative but reasonable starting point for model experimentation. Goes from 2000 to 2100. Where do we get our energy? In this baseline, a lot of coal. See that brown area? And red is oil and blue is gas. Do I think this is what's going to happen? No. I think we're going to do much better than this. However, it is a good place to start, and it represents the world's policies as accepted today and input in place today, not being strengthened. Other forecasts that have a lower baseline will assume strengthening over time and continued progress in policy. We have a lot of continued progress. Look in the bottom right, for example, energy efficiency continues to do better and better. The energy intensity of GDP comes down and down and down. And renewable energy grows and grows. I'm going to go find it down here. Primary energy demand from renewables continues to grow throughout the century. However, when we look at things that are really important, like the carbon price, it is $5 a ton here, but not continuing. Do I think it's going up? I think it probably will grow into the future, but that's not how we set up En-ROADS. It is a baseline that does not include strengthening. Why is it $5 a ton? 20% of emissions around the world are covered today by a carbon price. Europe, parts of the US, 5 major urban areas in China. But the average is $20 a ton. 20 times 0.25 gives us that $5. Of course, you can increase it to whatever you want. All right, that's what we'll do with En-ROADS. But right now, you said, hey, I'm concerned about a trillion trees getting discussed a lot, but maybe it won't help as much. That's not about energy. That really is about overall greenhouse gases and removals. So trees are in this green area of greenhouse gas emissions. You can see the land area, land use CO2. On top of it is the black area of burning coal, oil, and gas. Then we have F gases and methane and nitrous oxide. What I'm going to do is plant a lot of trees. And I want you to think, where might this lead temperature? We have more time. We would do a poll and have you guess that 3.3 goes somewhere. Does it go to 3.0? Does it go to 2.0? Does it go to 1.6? Run your mental model. Think for a second. I'm going to go pull up a different graph on the left. This isn't about energy. This is about removals. And I'm just going to plant a lot of trees. How do we call it? Of all the land put aside for afforestation, I think it's 700 million hectares. And this is our assumption. What if 100% of that is planted in seedlings? Here it comes. Boom. Here it comes. So I'll run it again. And you can see, as many of you who've seen our analysis before or seen the quotes we gave to Maxine Joselo in the Washington Post. Ava, can you post the article that Maxine Joselo wrote about our analysis in the Washington Post? It's only 0.1 degree. Why is it so little? Why is it so little? The main reason is, notice in what year do we have CO2 removals going up. What year? We know we need to get emissions down in the 2020s and 2030s, but it's really not till the 2050s or 2060s. You plant seedlings, you don't plant trees. It takes decades for those trees to get big enough to remove a large amount of CO2. And it really doesn't get to be a large amount. It only gets above 5 or 6, where we're putting in 60 here, you can see, as an overall volume from the other sources. So relative to the other sources, it's small. You can change some assumptions underneath. With this, you might say, wait, what did you assume for how long it took you to find the land? 10 years. Well, what if it's less? What if it takes less time to plant? Maybe it would be a little bit more and we would see results earlier. But we can see that it is not a major solution. So we tend to start there, and we would explore other ones. And I'll briefly just name that there are some other things that, like you guessed, aren't a major contributor to emissions reduction that might help in some way, but you wouldn't call a priority if they only help, say, like with new zero carbon energy, only 0.1, and they only help in the 2060s. When we know the priority is to get emissions down towards that red dot by 2030, at least that low, where the dream is a 50% drop by 2030. These would be higher priorities, things that get us down well below the red dot. So that's the next question in emissions reduction. What are the priorities? If not some of these lower priority things, what should we be testing? So I'm going to pull up a picture of the interface in the poll, and what do you think we ought to test? So click and put a dot, put a mark to the left or the right of the dot. Energy efficiency, carbon pricing, energy efficiency buildings and industry, nuclear, oil, taxing oil, carbon removal, cutting methane. This is great, you're doing it. Promoting electrification and energy efficiency, carbon pricing, nuclear, renewables. All right. Fantastic. This is the conversation we want to be having around emissions reduction. And even before I test these things, what are we trying to do? We are helping a group of people surface aspiration and vision. Here are things I'm excited about. Here's what I'd like to see. That first topic about crop yield and habitat loss and air quality, this is a conversation about what we would call like the current reality. It's here's where we are today, the truth of things. It's difficult news, current reality. This exercise right now is about vision, saying I can envision a world investing in electrification and energy efficiency, where we're open to boosting renewables, pricing carbon, cutting methane, all the things that you're adding here. What we're really defining is a gap between the world that we see that it is and what we'd like to see. Surface that good feeling of visioning and seeing what we'd really like to see. All right, you've suggested so many things. Let's go look at some of them. Let's go look at some of them. I'm going to pull up En-ROADS and can you change it, Ava? So I'm pinned right now. It's showing me different versions. Can you change this so I'm pinned up here? That would help me just a little bit. Okay. What did you suggest? So many things. We can test them in En-ROADS. I'm going to do this quicker than normally because we want to get onto some other topics. But you promoted carbon pricing, and look what it does when you make carbon more expensive, and energy efficiency in buildings and industry, and more efficient transportation systems, and electrifying everything in transportation. And there's a lot going on here, by the way, when you do this. subsidies and charging infrastructure. You can ban internal combustion engines, heat pumps here, reducing deforestation. Why not explore reducing food from animals and food waste, and overall reducing deforestation, cutting methane and other gases. Plant some trees, not a trillion. We don't have the land for that. We'd have to push people off of land. Carbon removal, perhaps. These are the kinds of things that together could get us well below 2 degrees, all the way down towards 1.5. Okay. Wouldn't it be wonderful to put together a suite of policies, and other things really help as well? Coal, oil, and gas taxing, all of these actions that together could get us even lower. That's the second big conversation. Physical risk, emissions reduction by way of, first, what are the lower priority things, and then starting to see higher priority actions. And of course, if you spend your time and do this slowly, you see priorities, things that lead us to not burn coal, oil, and gas. And I'll show you again the dramatic change that gets our emissions down here. I'll think I can reset this and then show the changes of how much we would need to reduce, particularly that fossil fuel CO2. Things that lead us to not burn coal, oil, and gas, but also methane and protecting forests and reforming food systems. These are some of the changes that together could get us to well below 2 degrees. Now, the next question along the way that usually comes up has to be, well, wait, how did we do all of this? And did we make sure we didn't create new problems in other sectors with all of these policies? I showed you before with the trillion trees and named, well, with a trillion trees, how much land would be required if we were to plant a trillion trees. And I'll move it back up here, and we can see the equity challenge from planting. No, it's not land for that. It is land for growing CO2 biomass. In this scenario that we just showed, you can see all those trees. The green area is from planting trees. The carbon price that we had put in drove some bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, that took some more land, and biochar. This is up to 800 million hectares, over 2 Indias of land, challenging some land use rights, indigenous people's rights. Who lives on that land? What happens to food prices if we were to take land that is growing food and move it towards, in some cases, plantations that are growing fast growing plants and trees in order to remove carbon? That's an equity challenge. We also ought to look at things like, what are energy prices like? Well, ouch, if overall cost of energy did this. I'll go to financial and look at overall price of oil, which suggests the price of gasoline. Are there ways where without as much taxes, we can get to similar positive results that don't lead the cost of energy to go up quite as much? And I'll note there are a variety of paths to get to this kind of scenario, some of which help the cost of energy and equity challenges there, some of which don't. They need to be considered. One note about this one, there are solutions being proposed. Some people say, hey, how much revenue from taxes is there? What is this? Revenue from taxes in silver is $2.5 trillion a year. Could that be given back to people who are suffering because the cost of energy went up for them? There's some ways to address this equity challenge. So this is really the third climate conversation that strategic conversations should happen. First, physical risks. What can we do to prevent these futures Third, equity. With the equity conversation, there is an opportunity in an area we call multi-solving. Dr. Beth Solomon, co-founder of our organization, coined that term to capture the idea that we can take actions that solve multiple problems at once in equity, in jobs, in well-being, and connection, racial tensions, justice issues, health, all of them together. Can we look for those opportunities? I'm going to flip forward to a nice picture that she made, a nice diagram, something called FLOWER, the framework for long-term, whole system, equity-based reflection. Here are all the different considerations. Can we find solutions for health and well-being, jobs and livelihood, resilience, energy, mobility, food and water, climate protection, biodiversity? She researches them with her team, Stephanie McCauley and others at Multi-Solving Institute. You can go see some in En-ROADS. The best one that we know of, you asked us to look at air pollution. Look, in this scenario that you made, look at this scenario for air quality. It doesn't just get not worse, it gets so much better. And notice how soon PM 2.5 emissions go down. They go down in the 2020s because if we don't burn coal, we don't put those pollutants into the atmosphere, reducing cardiovascular disease and asthma and other challenges, decreasing health costs as well. So it gets much better. Help the climate, help health and air quality at the same time. What a win-win. Let's look for more of those opportunities. Okay, those are the first three. The fourth topic that we find really important for these groups is regarding transition risk. Transition risks and opportunities. When we talk with businesses, financial services companies, the question is, if the world takes significant action on climate, is the business ready? Are the investments being made? If there's a foundation, are its investments ready for the changes that are coming? So we can use En-ROADS to see, what if the world takes significant action? What do we see in various sectors of transition risk? And I want to define it a little more formally because this is a new concept. Here's one way of defining it: financial risk that comes from the world moving to a cleaner, less polluting economy. Costs and losses business might face as laws, technology, consumer demands change to favor the environment. Ava, can you post that link from the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure? They just shut themselves down and got subsumed by something called the ISSB, which is a Sustainability Standards Board. But they did a really good job in their work of defining this idea of transition risk in policy and legal. If the laws change, if technologies and preferences change, the market changes, or their reputational changes and risks. Very specifically, here's what that could look like. And we've seen companies grapple with this. So take a scenario like this one, and I'm going to make the carbon price higher even and say, what if the world were to do this? Are the following kinds of companies ready? So the first one, of course, in the financial services or in foundations, anybody who has their money invested in coal, oil, and gas. Well, you know what coal is doing in this scenario, and in most scenarios. I'll pull it up. In this scenario, here's what demand for that product does. It drops precipitously. Others, we can go look at oil. Oil in this scenario, and mind you, what we ask is for groups to make their own scenario. What do you think is coming? And then what happens to various industries like oil? Here it peaks in, what is that, 2025, next year. Of course, well, we don't know, but you can test various futures. In the same way, natural gas. And with natural gas, I'll actually pull up how much carbon capture and storage, which is going to allow for some burning of gas, but capturing some of the emissions. In this case, we have some carbon capture and storage being built, but overall, it's dropping quite steeply. So there's a main transition risk. But you could also look and see, well, auto industry, what is going on, say, with the total electric share of transportation sales? This is both a risk and an opportunity. Go look at this graph for what would be coming regarding sales of internal combustion engines if the overall global industry were to electrify this fast in the transport sector. With that kind of growth, what's happening at General Motors and Toyota and the other companies that still have internal combustion engines? So there's an auto industry question. Manufacturing, retail, most commerce is going to be very curious about what I showed you before about the cost of energy. Just like it's an equity consideration, it is a transition risk question when it comes to overall cost of energy. Agriculture and food. How much food from animals? If you are one of these large meat and dairy companies, percent of food from animals in this scenario that we made going down steeply, that could really matter. Real estate, to what extent is this kind of change in energy efficiency of new buildings and industry going to be forced by regulation? Is that going to be in building codes, et cetera? Is electrification going to be built into building codes? Is no hookups of natural gas going to be built in? Although just this week, Berkeley, one of the leading cities in the US in banning new hookups for gas, repealed their ban. So what are the regulations and actions that are coming? And is your investment portfolio, is your company ready? That is this fourth question. So there they are. And note, I put them in order, but in our experience, they don't come up in order. What's happening here is that you are taking a simulator like En-ROADS and saying, we've got a game. We're going to go look at the impacts and see, can we create some scenarios to get to some goals like well below 2 and think about implications for ourselves and the world and other things that we care about. And what happens is 4 conversations. People will talk about physical risks. They'll talk about what to be done on emissions reduction. What about equity? And then transition risk and opportunities, recognizing that they're all 4 interrelated. Then comes, and not then, but now I'll talk about what pervades all 4 of these. And it is who we are as people. We're not talking about an issue like increasing the market share for your toothpaste, a pure business question. This is deeply personal. We care about the world. We care about the future. We care about people on the other side of the world. And so, and climate change is here and now. This is no joke. So the capacity for hope and our ability to hang on to a sense of possibility amidst some very difficult news, most every day in the newspaper. So what is underneath all of this, that as a leader, as a facilitator, as a participant, or a host in these conversations, you're going to be dealing with all throughout this, is the capacity for hope. Are you able to, within the group of people, have people be able to express who they are, how they feel about this issue, and retain the gap between what I showed you before, a vision of the world that we want to see, an honest assessment of the world as it is. And then, as Peter Senge had in his book, and Robert Fritz laid out in his book about what's called personal mastery, but I learned it from my mentor, Dana Meadows, that there's a gap between the vision and the current reality. And our work is to feel the rubber band pulling between these two. How do we keep aiming high with a vision, be honest about the world that is down here with the current reality, and not let our arms grow so tired that we give up and either lie to ourselves about how easy it's going to be or give into doomism. Oh, the West Antarctic ice sheet is going to fall in the water and it's all over. So what's the point? That is an easy out of this issue. So that is the last topic. And I want to ask you where you sit with it yourself, because that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going to run the different exercises that we run for people. So here is that question. Where do you sit yourself? I am hopeful. Hopeful is not optimistic. Hopeful is able to see the world you want, be honest about the world that is, and get up every day and do something in the practice of moving forward towards the results. Ava, can you post that op-ed I wrote about this with Auden Schindler? It was in the New York Times op-ed about working for climate as a practice. Something like climate change is impossible. Let's do it anyways. So where do you land? Somewhat agree that you are hopeful. Strongly agree, some of you. Somewhat disagree. Some of you right in the middle strongly disagree that you're not hopeful. Good to know. The point here isn't to fix this. The point is to help your group be honest about who they are. And if there is that conversation, and there's someone who is able to say they strongly agree or somewhat agree, let's all ask them. Let's all ask them, what are you doing to say A or B instead of D or E? How do we learn from each other about how to keep addressing physical risk, transition risk, emissions reduction, and equity steadily? Because that's what it's really going to take. Now, one way to help this is that we love in this to build it. And the way that we know to build it is to take this scenario, and I'll pull it back up. Here it is. I'm going to take this scenario, share the scenario link, and drop it here into chat for everyone. There it is. Go look at it. And so I'll ask you what I ask all of them. Look and just consider this possibility of a future that you created in which we invest in the renewable energy that's zero carbon energy. Actually, underneath it, you know what else we're going to need to do to really have it grow a good bit is we're going to need to invest as well in long-term storage in different ways. That'll help it grow even more. Less coal, oil, and gas, perhaps putting a price on carbon, investing in energy efficiency, changing diets, cutting deforestation, reducing methane in waste and in agricultural practices, planting some trees. Trees are good. They're not a huge solution, but note, trees are good. Maybe some carbon removal to get to a world well below 2 degrees. So I'll just ask you, what would you love about this kind of world? A world where we actually figured out there is no one big solution. It took many seeds to plant this garden. It's still possible. What would you love about being part of a world on track to making something like this happen? Just think, what would you love about it? I'm going to shift back over. Actually, we're not going to ask the poll yet. I'm going to be silent, and I ask you to join me in being silent. I'm going to time this for 60 seconds. What would you love? Be silent for 60 seconds. Think. What would you love about being part of a world on track to making something like this happen? Here we go. Can you believe that was just a minute? Can you believe that was only 1 minute? So, what would you love? Go to the poll. Go to the poll. What would you love? Tell us. We wouldn't have all our eggs in one basket. It's an approach that shows resiliency and flexibility, a future for your grandchildren, hope for your grandchildren, clean skies. Thank you. People working together inside our awareness of our power. End to occupations and war. How much less power to petrostates if we were to take that action? Human flourishing, healthy and safe world for the next generation. Leaving a legacy for future generations. Thank you. Knowing future generations will have a better future. We call this intergenerational justice and equity. It's a form of justice and equity. Don't have to feel so concerned, the less stress, a sense of community, biodiversity. Fantastic. That it would give our children hope and lessen their anxiety. Now, note, this is a question literally that we ask of those executives, of those C-suite folks. That's why I'm showing it to you. We take the time to ask this, setting a vision of what we want to see, clean air and inviting outdoors. Say that we came together to come up with solutions, a future, watching the next generation grow up in a positive, compromise-filled, habitable world of opportunities for all creatures to thrive. We're in this together. Lead by example. Bird song and clean air. Bird song and clean air, all species. And I don't think I even showed you with all of these things that you're noting. I didn't even show you. But bird song and clean air, how much better it is for bird song and clean air. Here, and I'm going to even crank this up, like we get down to 1.6, bird song and clean air. Let's go look at the birds. Birds, not a 23% drop in species losing more than half their range. Only 2%. Look at that. A much better future. You had looked earlier at crop yield, not with rice an 8% drop in crop yield, but only 3%. A much better future. Many of those results that you talk about being possible. I'm going to go back to ask you just a few more questions, not what more about what you would love, but really tapping into this, other ways to cultivate that sense of possibility of how people are feeling. So please type one word, or if you have two words, hyphenate them together. If you see a word you like, write it again. Hopeful still, like you could rewrite that and it gets bigger. With these groups, even in business and in industry and in financial services, government agencies, you have to acknowledge something about what people are bringing to this, or otherwise what happens is that people get uptight and they ask questions about technical things that they're really not interested in, but they'll ask because there's an anxiety if you can't express something about how you're feeling about the situation. So motivated, optimistic, hopeful, prosperity, activated, anxious, committed, part of a movement, dismayed and frustrated. This not only doesn't have to just be good feelings, absolutely. Sometimes there can be challenging feelings that come out of this as well. These are the kinds of things that we're cultivating. Talking about feelings has people be able to talk about what they want to see and honest about what is in the world. Okay, the next action is always with these workshops. Of course, this is not an intellectual exercise. We say, what are you going to do next? So I ask you, what are you going to do next? What is next for you? Teach. Thank you. And Ava, can you post the guided assignment for En-ROADS? The page for the guided assignment? Lobby. For educators, there's a version of this for homework for classrooms. Run more workshops. Sounds like you've done some already. Fantastic. There's so many people who are running workshops out there in the world. Share with friends. Teach, lobby. Conduct more workshops. So what is next for you? If it happens to be hosting, we run workshops, and you could send an email to solutions@climateinteractive.org. I'll share that link. Or actually, Ava, can you post there in chat, solutions@climateinteractive.org? That's where you should send a note if you would like to host a group to come and run this. Build hope with action, network. Share this resource. Teach. Fantastic. Next En-ROADS event during Earth Week. It's April 22nd. I'm doing the same, going to Louisiana State University for Earth Week myself. Do your share. Educate to convert people. Fantastic. Spread the news in an upcoming presentation. Build understanding in the community. Okay, you're going to lead an En-ROADS based course. Wonderful. By the way, if you want to learn how to lead a course like this or to run this, we have a whole training called Mastering En-ROADS. Ava, could you post the link to Mastering En-ROADS? It's an online free course with 63 short videos to teach you how to run this workshop that I'm sharing right here. Okay, we're going to end in just 2 minutes after 60. I'm going to stick around to answer questions, and our team is going to stick around to answer more of your questions. But I just want to take us back to this journey that we've been on. Basically, I've been saying we need more strategic climate conversations with top decision makers. We're saying, invite us. We can come run these. Invite one of our climate ambassadors. Ava, would you post the link to the page with the 780 people around the world who are ambassadors? Many of you are on this call. We need to have these conversations. What are the conversations? It's not as simple as, oh, prevent climate change. There's so much more to it. We notice that there are 5 things that happen. We don't dictate the 5. What we do is we set up a playful environment, a game. Let's get temperature below 2 degrees. But here are the 5 things that always come up. Let's talk about impacts. Let's talk about here and now. 1/3 of Pakistan underwater last year. Emissions reduction. What can we do to prevent this problem in the future? What are the high priority solutions? What are the lower priority solutions? How do we take advantage of multi-solving? How do we avoid creating new problems for the people whom we are trying to help with these policies? How do we address justice, health, nature, other equity issues that are out there? Is our company, are our investments, are we ready? If the world takes action, what are the implications for us? What are the opportunities we want to take advantage of? How are they interrelated? In this work, in our careers, in the deeply personal, challenging work of hanging in there and showing grit despite some of the most challenging daily news and prognostications about the future of humanity and life on Earth. How do we wake up in the morning and just keep on plugging? How do we hold that gap between the world that we really want to see, the world that is? Hold on to that gap, retain hope in it all. These are the 5 conversations I encourage you, with or without En-ROADS, to have with people to get us on track to the world that we really want to see. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Go get them, everybody. We'll stick around for questions. Bye-bye.